still there? To delete this message, press 7. To save it in the archives, press 9. To hear more options, press 0.
What are you talking about?
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is episode 23, and we got a lot to get through. It's going to be another medley episode where I cover some of the most interesting hands I played last week, and that was all in Las Vegas. Decided to take a spontaneous trip just for fun. Didn't think I'd play much poker, but I ended up playing 3 different sessions, and the most interesting of those was probably the first night. I went to the Westgate for a meetup game that my favorite podcaster was holding. His name is DJ AF. He has a podcast named Sessions, if you guys are interested. But anyway, he decided to host a meetup game for all his supporters. It was advertised as 1-2 no limit, but somehow it ended up turning into a mixed game, and every other round it switched to PLO with one card showing to the rest of the table. I've never even played regular PLO. I'm a total rookie, so I'm for sure behind the skill edge of all the other players, but it was mostly a night meant to have fun and not to be taken too seriously. But I did end up getting into a pretty big hand, so let me share that with you guys right now. Let's just jump straight into the action. We're playing 4-card PLO with 1 card showing, as I mentioned, and the under the gun player puts in an open to $10. So it's 1-2 blinds, $10 open under the gun, and the next player to act calls. Now the button also calls, and I'm in the big blind looking down at ace, ace, 6, deuce. Black aces and 6 deuce of diamonds. Not the best pocket aces to have, seeing as we have a 6 and a 2, I think. Obviously still gonna put in a raise, so I pot it. Not sure what the amount ended up being. I think we just called it $100. No one was being too specific as it was a meetup game. The original opener folds, and the second caller puts in the call. The button folds, so we're going heads up to a flop, and it's at this point that I notice the card that this player is showing is the ace of hearts. Heads up to a flop, which comes ace of diamonds, jack of diamonds, 3 of clubs. Somehow we smash the 1-outer to make top set, and on top of that we have a flush draw, even though it's a 6-high flush draw. Seeing as my opponent has an ace, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, I decide to just check and then ship once he decides to bet. I'm pretty sure he's gonna bet. He obviously has a pair of aces. So that's what I do. I check it over to him, and he puts out a bet of $100. At this point, I only have 300 behind, so I announce all in. He doesn't think for too long and puts in the call, announcing that he has top 2 pair. I show my cards, and he shows ace, king, jack, 6. So it's a total cooler, I think, even by PLO standards. Turn was a queen, and the river was a 10. So we lost to king, jack. That makes a straight, and our set of aces goes down in flames. Pretty terrible hand. Ended up getting stacked right there. He covered us, and the pot was around $800, I believe. So that was pretty much the only noteworthy hand I played there.
Usually the guy over there. Glasses. I can't go anywhere with my hair. Glasses.
But anyway, the next day I ended up finding 1-2 no limit, where you only get 2 cards instead of 4, and I'm a little less lost as to how to play the game. Ended up going to Bally's. The buy-in was 300. Let's see if we can make some hands. We're playing with a few friends, so things could get out of line again, but let's see if we can run up a stack here at Bally's. Alright, so jumping straight into some hands. In this first hand, the under the gun player opens to $6. The player next to act calls, and I look down at king, queen of spades next to act. I could contemplate a 3-bet, but it's a good hand to play multi-way, I think, and don't necessarily want to be 3-betting in my very first orbit, not knowing any of the players at the table. So I take the lower variance route and just call. the late position player calls, and the button calls. So we're 5 ways to a flop, which comes queen, 10, 7, rainbow. The under the gun player checks this flop, the player in between checks, and when the action's on me, I think the best play here is to put out a bet, so I make it $25 to go. The button calls, and the original raiser under the gun calls. Everyone else folds, so 3 ways to a turn, which is the deuce of hearts. Surprisingly, the under the gun player now puts out a bet of $40. A little bit strange, he opened pre-flop, check called the flop, and then leads the turn. I think our hand is pretty much a call every time, so that's what I decide to do, and the button doesn't think for too long and also calls. So a decent sized pot here brewing for a 1-2 game. The river is the 5 of clubs, pretty much a brick, and the under the gun player bets $100. Not sure what he's representing. I think, once again, our hand is just a call, being that if we were ahead on the turn, we gotta be ahead on this river. So that's what I decide to do. The button folds, and the under the gun player seems a little hesitant to show his cards. When someone doesn't look like they want to show, I just show my cards, and he ends up throwing his in the muck. So I'm not sure what he had, but I'm glad to finally scoop a pot here in Vegas, and I feel much better playing with 2 cards instead of 4.
Congrats, man. You guys are awesome.
In the next hand, the under the gun player opens to $10. I look down at pocket 5s next to act and decide to put in the call, and there's 3 more callers behind me. So multi-way to a flop, which comes pretty good looking for pocket 5s. It's Jack 5-3 rainbow. So we smash metal set on a fairly dry board. The under the gun player checks, and I decide to put out a small bet of $15, hoping to induce a raise from a jack, and if nothing else, keep a lot of weaker hands in there. So 2 people call behind, and the under the gun player folds. So we're gonna be out of position 3 ways to a turn, which is a beautiful jack. Obviously it's a great card because it gives us a full house, but the best thing about this card is that very often it'll give at least one of our opponents behind trips, which is a very hard hand to fold, as I'm sure many of you guys know. This is a green light for us to bet pretty big. There's a lot of value to be had. So I put in a bet of $90, and unfortunately both of my opponents fold. So it turns out no one had a jack, and we don't get that much value with our full house. On to the next hand. Okay, in this next hand, there's 2 limpers, and I look down at pocket jacks from the button. I make it $15 to go. The small blind makes the call, and the first limper makes the call. So 3 ways to a flop here, which comes 10, 8, 6 with 2 clubs. So we flop an overpair, but it's definitely not the most exciting board for pocket jacks. There's a lot of 2-pair combos, even flop straights, sets, flush draws, straight draws. So we're gonna tread with some caution here. The small blind checks, and unexpectedly, the under the gun limper puts out a bet of $40. So it's a bit of a weird spot because this player in particular was very gambly and was putting a lot of money in the middle, but the small blind was a very tight player. So being caught up with these 2 players at the same time, I wasn't sure what the best course of action was. If it was heads up against the gambler, I would contemplate a raise here fairly often, but I didn't really want to raise and didn't really want to fold, so I ended up just making the call, and the small blind makes the call as well. So still 3 ways to a turn, which is not a great card. The 4 of clubs, bringing in the obvious front door flush. The small blind checks, and the under the gun player doesn't slow down and puts out a bet of $65. I think at this point our hand is just a bluff catcher. He's probably not double barreling into 2 opponents twice with anything worse than jacks. And more importantly, the small blind instantly stacked up his remaining chips into like a little tower, ready to slide them into the middle. This guy was a fairly older gentleman. Don't think he's angling at all when he's doing this. So 3 ways with pocket jacks here. I decided to just let it go. And the small blind, sure enough, rips the rest of his chips in there. I think it was around 120. And surprisingly, the under the gun player folded. So I'm not sure what was going on there, but I'm fairly confident we were behind at least the small blind and decided not to pay it off this time. So that wrapped up the session at Bally's. Decided to call it a night after winning around $300. get some sleep, and the next day, head to probably the most beautiful poker room in all of the lands, the Wynn/Encore. Whereas the last 2 nights had been very casual and very fun, the Wynn was pretty much the opposite. This is because the room is just so nice that it attracts a bunch of poker pros. That combined with the fact that it's the World Series of Poker, there is a lot of good players in this poker room, and even at 1-3 no limit, half of my table were pros. So I decided to put on my try-hard pants and do my best to hang with these guys. Although I did have 1 or 2 drinks, decided to actually focus and do my best. I ended up being pretty card dead and only played around 2 hours before we had to get to some dinner plans, but there was one pretty interesting hand that occurred around halfway into the session. Alright, so in this hand, the under the gun player makes an open to $12. I think this guy was probably the best player at the table, given what I'd seen so far. The action folds to me, I'm in the cutoff with King Jack of diamonds and decide to make the call, and the button, who was probably the other best player at the table, also makes the call. So 3 ways to a flop here, which comes King 9-7 with 2 spades. The under the gun player checks, and I think most of the time I should be putting in a bet here, but at some frequency, checking top pair is good just to protect our range, so I decided to check, and the button puts out a bet of $25. The under the gun player thinks for a really long time and folds, and I obviously make the call, having top pair with decent kicker. We go to an interesting turn heads up, which is the Jack of spades, bringing in the front door flush, but also giving us 2 pair. I check it over to him once again, and this time he checks it back after thinking about it for a little bit. So feeling pretty good about our hand. The river comes a brick, and I think now it's okay to check and trap or bet and just try to get value from worst 2 pairs or possibly just a king. So I decided to put out a bet of $55. He thinks for a long time and eventually puts in a raise to $210. So it's a really interesting spot. And after I think about it for a little bit, the main thing going through my mind is the value hands that he has in his range that check back the turn for pot control would never raise the river for value. So that includes like 2 pairs and sets. If he's checking the turn, it's just to call a bet on the river or to bet himself if checked to, but never raising a bet, I don't think. And all the hands that improve on the turn, such as straights and flushes, should obviously be betting. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and when the story doesn't add up, and I know that this player is capable of bluffing the bottom of his range, I decide to close my eyes and click call, and he says you're good. So I show my cards, and we scoop a pretty nice pot. Around 30 minutes later, decided to rack up, go film some drone footage of the sunset, which you guys saw at the intro, and head to dinner. So pretty happy to book a win in probably the toughest game that I played in Vegas, and yeah, things went okay, luckily. So when it was all said and done, ended up breaking even on the trip. I won at Bally's and I won at the Wynn, but we lost a good amount at the Westgate meetup game. Not really looking forward to playing PLO again, at least not until I get better. But anyway, can't wait to be back in Vegas July 9th through July 12th. For those of you guys interested in meeting up, add me on Instagram, the link's in the description. Shoot me a message or check my stories. I'll be posting my location as I play different sessions. Anyway, that wraps up this vlog. Thank you guys for watching as always. I wish you all the best of luck out there, and I'll see you next time. Peace.